Crypto Markets Update is brought to you by KuCoin, the best place to find the next crypto gem. All right, joining us now to discuss the crypto markets is Michele Schneider, Managing Partner at trading educator Marketgauge Group in New Mexico. Welcome, Michele. So we are seeing the crypto markets crash right now. Bitcoin, of course, the narrative was supposed to be digital gold acting as a safe haven. We're not seeing that right now, are we?
No, and this really goes back to a conversation we probably had a year ago on the Bitcoin versus gold debate and people thinking that gold was dead. And obviously everything surfaces cyclically when it's got its due, and clearly with geopolitical concerns and this runaway inflation, what we're seeing is exactly that. Gold now is shining, literally, and Bitcoin is having some issues. However, let's step back on this Bitcoin thing because we really, I think, amazingly are still holding a very critical level here at around this 33,000. And so that actually could be some kind of a good signal if it continues to hold. I wouldn't go flying in and buying these dips. Obviously, people in the equities market have done that, have now really suffered. But I would really be keen to see not only if Bitcoin can hold here around 33, but even Ethereum in January traded as low as 2150, and we're above that now. So we're heading into this support, which could be good news going forward.
Going on for quite some time, though, of Bitcoin being a safe haven, of Bitcoin being a hedge against inflation. Our inflation rate now is 7.5% year over year compared to last year when it was 1%, 1.2%. We have a major war underway right now in Europe between two of the largest countries there. And what do we see? We see Bitcoin is off its all-time highs. We see it's off its all-time highs, even, at a time when inflation's high, at a time when there's warfare. These narratives don't seem to necessarily hold right now in a time of crisis. Does that have a long-term effect on how people view Bitcoin as those kind of assets? Does the narrative need to change for it to add value, or will this have a long-term impact on people's view of crypto to the point that they say, you know what, this isn't necessarily what we shouldn't have been buying into this this theory as we have been over the past few years? Does it have a negative long-term impact?
Well, I think you have to look at herd mentality as definitely influential, but also at some point very ephemeral too. It changes on a dime. So yeah, I mean, for a year or more, we were all about Bitcoin, Bitcoin, gold dead, gold dead. Now we're seeing that reverse. So if you take that same sort of flip of herd mentality, we could easily see that go back, especially with now considerations about sanctions on Russian banks and the whole SWIFT global interbank payments. That's been on the table as one of the ways to create a sanction that would not only really hurt Russia and Russian people, but also probably backfire on Europe. That could actually be good for gold, but we don't, again, we're getting into this, it's either or. There could be a point where people realize that Bitcoin still has its value because it's decentralized. It goes away from the traditional banks, and this type of manipulation that we can see with fiat currency and with banking regulations. At this point, we still don't have these crypto regulations, could actually come back and bring crypto back to favor. So I think you have to look at each thing individually for its merit. And yes, we have the unwinding now where Bitcoin's going down and gold's going up. But that doesn't, again, I don't think we necessarily have to think about this as, Godzilla versus King Kong. I mean, one's got to win. I think they both have to be looked at for their own individual merit.
Yeah, except that gold is up at a time when inflation is up, as we've seen now. I mean, that in many ways, last year, we were saying, oh, well, look at gold, it isn't going, and yet we're having all this spending. But the inflation rate hadn't increased because the multiplier in which that increased dollars into the economy didn't necessarily translate at the time to higher prices. Now it does, and people have taken to gold. So my question, though, is do these narratives persist? And these are narratives that have been pushed repeatedly by the maxis, by people on Twitter, by the influencers, saying this is the safe haven. This is the hedge against inflation. And a lot of retail people bought into it. A lot of institutional players bought into it. You could find hedge fund managers say, yes, this is the way we're fighting inflation. And yet, here we are, this far into the inflation rate in the midst of a war, and the prices are off the all-time highs. So I guess my question is, do those narratives persist long after the war has stopped? Maybe perhaps inflation is tamed at some point, maybe not. Do these narratives persist?
Well, I have two comments on that. First of all, I think the warning here is that in terms of these narratives and in terms of the talking heads and the analysts and the Twitter influencers, et cetera, I think the lesson here overall should be that you better learn to think for yourself and really understand some type of technical analysis, at least enough to make some decision before things have totally crashed. And one of the narratives, for example, was buy the dip. And, I was going on media saying, well, what does that mean? At what point is the dip? Okay, so we don't know. So that's number one, is I think people hopefully learn to think for themselves a little bit more. To talk about gold and inflation, it was so undervalued, and that's why I was talking about the fact that we should not dismiss gold. Let's just look at 1980, where the Dow was and where gold was. Okay, 1980, which was the pinnacle of inflation, right? Gold traded up to $850 an ounce. The Dow was at 1,000. So now here we are, 2022, gold has doubled, and the Dow went to 33,000, so 33 times. So just in terms of value, silver even worse. So just in terms of you're looking at the rate of inflation versus what gold did, what the Dow did, and then, of course, with the actual 7.5%, which now is looking more like 8%, gold was a bargain. And it took a long time for people to figure it out. And now, of course, you're going to get that shift into herd mentality, like, wow, well, based on current valuations, gold could go up to 5,000. We're already starting to see that. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. And of course, getting back to Bitcoin, what impact does that have? At some point, Bitcoin will start to look more valuable because of its historical price action. So, this is why passive investing is dangerous. Listening to people and making trading decisions off of the narrative is dangerous. And learning to think for yourself a little bit and just step back and understand what value is and how things can shift is also extremely important. I think these are the big lessons that we're going to see here in 2022.
Michele, finally, anything interesting happening in the alt markets? Because we're talking a lot about Bitcoin. Are we just going to see another sort of sea of red where everybody just kind of like all the other coins follow Bitcoin's lead? Or do you think we might see some sort of breakout or different performers in the alt markets?
Well, I think right now you really have to look at the large caps, at Bitcoin and Ethereum, to make the decisions in terms of the altcoins. That doesn't mean something couldn't emerge. Certainly, Decentraland Mana is still something, even though it's come off a lot, could at some point prevail. Solana, which still, again, has not reached its January low, could come back. All of these things could come back, but I think they will struggle until we see a sign that Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular have subsided and have found some kind of floor of support.